Good evening and welcome to the 6th in the series of distinguished lectures hosted by the Anguilla Social Security Board and the University of the West Indies Open Campus Anguilla in celebration of Social Security Week. Before we do anything else, we invite Pastor Perry Hughes to lead us in the invocation, followed by Ms. Akira Rogers of the Albina Lake Hodge Comprehensive School Concert Band with the national song.
Good evening. Shall we all stand, please? Let's pray. God of mercy, love, and grace, we approach your throne tonight with grateful hearts. We thank you for your wisdom and for your guidance that you have bestowed upon the Social Security Organization over the past 40 years. We acknowledge tonight that because of your undying love and having a strong leadership, a hard-working staff, dedicated to the task, we have come this far. We ask for your continual blessing upon this organization as we secure features and improve the quality of lives here in Anguilla and even abroad. May you continue to give us the grace to build this institution. Your word says in 1 Corinthians 3:10, states, according to the grace of God which was given to me, like a wise master builder, I lay a foundation and another building on it. But each man must be careful how he builds on it. Tonight, God, we declare that a secure foundation has been laid, and we now place it in your hands for generations to come. Thank you for Mr. Dwight Horsford, who has so willingly agreed to share his knowledge with us tonight, and the University of the West Indies Open House for partnering with us to facilitate this lecture. I pray that we will use what will be shared here tonight to enhance the service that we offer and to better equip us for the tasks ahead. I pray, God, that at the end of this lecture tonight, we can certainly say Social Security is serving its purpose and playing its role in this global pandemic and beyond. Bless this gathering and all that has been provided for us tonight. This we ask through Jesus Christ, our Lord. And everybody say, Amen.
Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you very much, Akira Rogers and Pastor Perry Hughes. Honorable Premier and Minister of Finance, Dr. Ellis Lorenzo Webster. Honorable Speaker of the House of Assembly, Mrs. Barbara Bourne and Mr. Bourne. Honorable Minister with responsibility for Home Affairs, Mr. Kenneth Hodge, Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Dwight Horsford, Pastor Perry Hughes and other members of the clergy, Chair of the Board of Directors, Mrs. Jacqueline Brian Niles, and other members of the Board of Directors of the Anguilla Social Security Board, Director Mr. Timothy Hodge, Deputy Director Dr. Magdalene Lewis, PRO Ms. Rosanna Brown, and other members of the team at the Social Security Board, staff of the House of Assembly, distinguished UWI alumni and friends, permanent secretaries, department heads, colleagues from other educational institutions, staff, faculty, and students of the University of the West Indies, the Open Campus UWI Stat Ambassador, Ms. Kamaloy Murphy, members of the press, and you, our esteemed audience, both here in this honorable House of Assembly and those joining us by radio, television, or live stream on Facebook. Thank you for joining us, and good evening. Distinguished lectures form part of the National and Regional Development Outreach Initiative of the University of the West Indies Open Campus. Because development is a collaborative process, collaboration is critical. And when we reached out 6 years ago, the Anguilla Social Security Board, which is also charged with a similar mandate, readily partnered with us to present this annual series. These lectures allow public speakers, researchers, and scholars from various or varied disciplines of academia, the arts, civil society, to share their work and ideas in the interests of national development. The UWI therefore sees distinguished lectures as part of its commitment to bringing the UE to you and ensuring that we meet the challenge that was issued just 1 year ago by our esteemed alumnus, the late Reverend Dr. Vichelli Gums, that institutions of higher learning should be active in helping to shape the thinking and development of our island, and that we should be bridge builders so that the next generation can receive a mantle whereby they can forge a destiny. Last year, we focused on resilience, and that was in the context of natural disasters, not knowing that 2020 and a global health pandemic would force us to dig even deeper for our survival. But Anguillians have always been a resilient people. Our history speaks to our strength and endurance. So this evening, as we join with the Anguilla Social Security Board in celebrating the 40th anniversary of the passage of the Social Security legislation, we applaud the foresight of our leaders back then. In this context, we also deem it appropriate to ask what is now a very pertinent question. Is Social Security serving its purpose? And what is the role of Social Security in the global pandemic and beyond? We look forward to the presentation by our honorable speaker and the discussions that will follow in the hope that we can begin to answer these very pressing questions. As I acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Mrs. Cora Richardson Hodge, I now call on the Director of the Anguilla Social Security Board, Mr. Timothy Hodge, to bring his remarks and welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and protocol being accepted, I would like to welcome you to this auspicious occasion here, where we celebrate in this distinguished lecture the 40th anniversary of the passage of the Social Security Act on 3rd November 1980. Not within these walls, but within the walls of the House of Assembly in Anguilla, which to me and to many represents perhaps the most significant legislation ever passed in Anguilla. The Social Security Act's the Social Security system's formation being, to me and to others, the second most important act of our revolutionary leader and his pioneers following the Anguilla Revolution in 1967. And in fact, I and others believe that though they are separated by some years, 13 years, they are linked together closely. That is, the revolution which brought political freedom and the social security system which sought to provide protection for the people of Anguilla and their families. While that was 40 years ago, we are still fortunate to have some of those alive who were part of the House of Assembly on that day. Sir Emil Gums, Mr. Albert Hughes, Mr. Watkins Hodge have left us. Mr. Hubert Hughes is still with us. Mr. Nashville Webster is still with us, although not in Anguilla. Mr. Houghton Smith, who was a nominated member of the House, is still with us. Mr. Levens is deceased. And of course, our father of the nation and the one who piloted the legislation, Mr. James Ronald Webster, is no longer with us. We are fortunate to have in these walls today Mrs. Fennis Carty, who was the clerk of the Assembly on that day. Could you give Mrs. Carty a round of applause, please? Now, Mr. Pastor Hughes spoke about foundations and building. And I'd like to refer to another scripture which speaks about building. And it says, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. And so we have always recognized the presence of Almighty God and his purpose in these things. We have also been very careful to recognize and to acknowledge foundation. You also spoke, the verse also spoke of foundations. And the Social Security Act is the foundation of the social security system. And so every year, we celebrate Social Security Week, the week in which the Social Security Act was passed. That is November 3rd. Not the actual beginning of the system, which was on January 1st, 1982, but the passage of the Act, because that is the foundation. And we have come here before to do this. We actually had the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, the Honorable Kenny Anthony, deliver a lecture here for us in a Social Security Week, right in this house, within these walls, on the 25th anniversary of the passage of the Act. So we are here today and we want to welcome all of you We recognize the Speaker of the House who has made these halls available for us. And we thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. We thank you all for coming, and we look forward to having a most engaging lecture by the Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Horsford. Thank you, and welcome again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hodge. And now it is my pleasure to invite my colleague, in part of the leadership team at the UWI Open Campus Anguilla, Mrs. Annika Webster-Lake, to introduce our speaker.
Honorable Premier, other members of the Legislative Assembly, Chair, board members, Director, and other members of senior management team, and staff of the Anguilla Social Security Board, Manager of the University of the West Indies, British Overseas Territories Open Campus Sites, and the staff of UWI Open Campus Anguilla, members of the media, other invited guests, listening audience. This evening, I have the pleasure of introducing our lecturer. He is a national of Grenada, a barrister at law, who has been practicing for over 17 years in the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. He has been admitted to and practiced before the courts of Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica and Grenada, in the High Court and Court of Appeal of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. In his native land, he held several prominent positions, which include former Solicitor General 2013 to 2018, former member of the Senate in the Upper House of the Parliament 2008 to 2013, former chairman of both the Hospital Authority 2016 to 2018 and the Airports Authority 2015 to 2018, and former director of the Grenada Electricity Company, Grenlec, 2014 to 2017. In 2005 to 2008, he served as a member of the Investment Committee of the National Insurance Board of the National Insurance Scheme, NIS, the Social Security Authority in Grenada. During that same period, he also served as legal advisor to the Telecommunications Regulatory Commission in Grenada. He is an alumnus of the University of the West Indies, having studied at Cave Hill Campus, Barbados, and the Hugh Wooding Law School in Trinidad. He has substantial experience in civil, public, and constitutional law, as well as regulatory matters in public utilities and water. Currently, he serves as Attorney General of Anguilla, a post he has held since 1st October 2018. Outside of being an accomplished academic, reliable sources confirm that our distinguished lecturer loves old school music and can take some serious turns on the dance floor. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming this evening's lecturer, the Honorable Attorney General of Anguilla, Mr. Dwight Horsford.
Good evening, everyone. I don't think I'll need this. Thank you. Although the protocol of recognition has already been traversed, I wish to recognize especially the Premier, Honorable Dr. Webster, Minister of Home Affairs, Honorable Kenneth Hodge, Madam Speaker, Honorable Barbara Webster Bourne, Honorable Leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition, the Honorable Cora Richardson Hodge, other distinguished guests and personalities, including the Chairman of the Board of Social Security, the Director, and the hard-working staff and friends, all in attendance this evening. When I was asked to, well, first of all, I did not know that my fetish for old school music, particularly old school calypso and soca, was widely known in Anguilla. And that fetish is a little bit natural for me because I come from a mixed heritage, being both Grenadian and Trinidadian as well. But when I was asked to deliver remarks this evening as a presenter in this distinguished lecture series, I wondered whether the Social Security Board and other organizers were, or I should put, wished to play a trick on me. For you will discover that I am no expert, but like everyone else, if anything, I'm an expert at having an opinion. And so I hope to share my thoughts, ideas, and opinions on the topic, is Social Security serving its purpose? The role of Social Security in the global pandemic and beyond. I'm in this regard honored to be asked to give this lecture, if you will. And also in this regard, I am much the apprentice. And as a dutiful apprentice, I endeavor to be worthy of the assignment. It is a signal honor for me to speak with you this evening for two reasons, and a particular privilege too. Since I am a graduate of the University of the West Indies, it is a moment of Pelican pride for me. And I remember moments earlier saying to Dr. Banks that I always wear the Pelican pin. Unfortunately, this evening, I took the wrong evening coat. So, but my pride burns ever bright and strong. As I say, it's a moment of Pelican pride for me to observe the strident work of the University of the West Indies, this noble institution, in its fulfillment of the mission to educate our people, our West Indian people, to uplift our minds and forge a new West Indian civilization reflective of our own aspirations and dreams, something touched on earlier by Dr. Banks. And I'm very glad to see this continued manifestation of UWI's animating purpose, if you will. With much moving observance, I would like to borrow and perhaps adapt a bit some of the words of Lord Macaulay 2 centuries ago when he remarked about the fervent strength and passion of what was then known as the Church of Rome, and perhaps applied to this strident move, onward move by the University of the West Indies, and declare of the University of the West Indies that indeed, and I quote, she may still exist in undiminished vigor. I thank the Social Security Board and the UWI Open Campus for affording me this opportunity. Now, I can assure you that my remarks this evening would not in the least be as exciting as the United States presidential elections, which the world is witnessing at this time. But my remarks on the topic shall be brief. I hope no briefer than previous speakers who have had this honor of presenting on a topic in this distinguished lecture series. I'm told, and he mentioned earlier, that is the director, I'm told by the director of Social Security that in delivering these remarks this evening as presenter, I would be joining the company of past presenters such as former Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Dr. Kenny Anthony. Dr. Anthony was also a law lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Caville campus. And some of his scholarly works, I and others, like the sister of my introducer, with whom I sat in class, I and others had to read his scholarly works as students of the law. Whilst I am indeed humbled by assignment to such association, distinguished association, I am not worthy of it. Neither have I attained the heights of scholastic objectivity as those distinguished personalities like Dr. Anthony. But for today, ladies and gentlemen, but for this evening, I will pretend that I am. Social security, a human imperative. Never before in the policy of human conduct has a concept been more important than that of economic well-being and security of the community. Economic security has been an initiative not just of human conduct, but it has been an instinctive human imperative throughout the ages. Throughout the ages. The need to provide for the welfare of others emerged from this basic natural law. As societies evolved, economic and industrial functions became more diverse and complex, resulting in severe and unequal social consequences to the community. The community itself became transformed into the nation. In turn, social and economic crises naturally came about, consequent upon those tensions inherent in that transformation of the community to nation. The welfare and economic security of families, villages, and workers could no longer be sustained or guaranteed in this context of a community by their own labors and endeavors. Instead, what happened? Organizations and friendly societies and trade unions took the place of the community to take responsibility for social economic security. The social consequences of the emergence of the modern industrialized capitalist societies were not only unequal, but they were rather unpleasant. The responsibility for economic security of the people now fell to the state. The primary obligation of the state is the welfare of the people, not to wage war, not defense of territory, not to accord wealth to one group in contradistinction to another, but the primary responsibility of the state is the welfare of the people. And following the Great Depression, with something like a third of the nation falling into abject poverty, the Social Security Act of 1935 came into being in the United States. Elsewhere in Europe and the United Kingdom, after the Second World War, national insurance schemes, such as you call them in neighboring territories, some say Social Security, some say national insurance. National insurance schemes also came about with a welfare mandate as the primary function. Those schemes were contributory social insurance schemes to afford basic protections to citizens of working age from job loss and loss of income. Now, in the modern post-colonial West Indian context now, we see Social Security, national insurance, established and operating in territories and states up and down the Caribbean and the OECS sub-region. They have become commonplace. Perhaps it's interesting to note that, and I took time to research this. As I say, I'm no expert, so I have to do the work. It's interesting to note that whereas Social Security and the national insurance schemes that I just alluded to were conceived as a response, and its standing balances are the people's money. The Social Security Fund, therefore, is a prudential fund which must be managed with the utmost fidelity to the public beneficiaries, the people. I have alluded to the originating context of Social Security in general and its founding in Anguilla. Something must be said, I think, about its present objects and future role. The original intent to secure benefits, retirement benefits, sickness, maternity, old age benefits, to working people by insuring them against these eventualities on the basis of mandatory national insurance was at the heart of its founding. These are the fundamental objectives or objects of Social Security. The Social Security Board, and I'm grateful to the board for all the information that they have given to me since I have elected this topic. I've been more or less inundated with information, more of the statistical data kind, but I did my best, and I'm grateful to the board for it. The board has developed over the years since its founding and has done reasonably well. The cyclical crises, ladies and gentlemen, of the world markets and the business cycle in the decades since the establishment of Social Security and elsewhere national insurance. Since the establishment of these funds in the Caribbean, those cyclical crises and the economic downturn and the onslaught on communities and families that accompany these crises are conditions which have brought about a new social imperative to which Social Security is poised to attend. And I'm in the profession of using and choosing words carefully, is poised to attend. I'm not suggesting lock, stock, and barrel that these emerging phenomena must cause the fund to bear the brunt of all its effects. I'm not suggesting that at all. But it cannot be denied that the COVID-19 global pandemic underscores the inadequacy, in my view, of the conventional Social Security and national insurance schemes and models. Already, since the onslaught of the pandemic, the Social Security Board has paid over millions in unemployment benefits and related relief. In recognition of the new emerging social and economic landscape, in this pandemic context, government has responded in ways that are creative by, in collaboration with Social Security, assisting in unemployment relief. You would immediately recognize in your minds that that is, or more likely now to be, an emerging objective of Social Security. The new imperative of which I speak is that the fund must be able to, the fund must be sustainable to be able to address the urgent necessity for basic economic security during a prolonged public health crisis. This indeed must be a risk which, going forward, all Social Security schemes must seriously consider. And one might wonder, COVID-19 pandemic will pass. It appears, if you refer to recent historical record, that such pestilences usually don't prop up for long periods of time, in some cases half a century, a century. But I propose to make a different argument if you are receptive to it. The rapid growth of human population in relation to the frightening depletion of natural, food, and water resources, coupled with the twin forces of globalization and climate change, will potentiate the risk or risks of infectious diseases and pestilence of the kind that we are now seeing. So, a prolonged public health crisis of the kind that we are experiencing now may visit us again before long. The Social Security Fund, therefore, cannot be a stagnant trust in such an environment. Neither can its purpose or purposes be conventional or remain so. The impact of the pandemic has been so severe and multidimensional that the objective reality is that we must now consider expanding the role of Social Security to address both economic security and basic healthcare needs. The Social Security Fund, which, as I mentioned, is the people's money, must be deployed in the expansion of benefits to meet the needs of the time. The fund, being a prudential national insurance fund, ought not to be used as a sinking fund for the government of the day. Neither must it be used for political expediency in the application of special community projects. The purposes of the trust is well known. These purposes are well known, and they are well set out clearly in statute. The fund is not meant either to benefit one class of persons. The fund was established for all the people, to benefit all the people, its contributors. So perhaps the time has come for reform, not just here, but reform, I would say, of Caribbean national insurance schemes and indeed Social Security. An examination of the benefits currently paid out under such schemes set against the economic challenges of the situation of the crises brought upon all of us by this pandemic reveals a critical truth. And that truth is that those benefits are parsimonious as they are inadequate. Broadly speaking, I do not wish you to take away, as I began saying, from my own opinion, that Social Security, not just in Anguilla, but Social Security as a basic human protection scheme, I don't want you to take away that does not meet its initial or basic purposes. Because that, I would even argue against that. It has met those purposes. Broadly speaking, Social Security has met its original fundamental objectives as set out in its enabling law. But it is yet to meet the totality of the vision of its founding father. It must evolve and it must modernize to serve the changing times and a community on the move. So perhaps time for reform. I suppose from all of this, I mean to say that these unusual times that have befallen us require the fund to undergo much needed reform. One can think of a catalogue of changes or reforms that could be made to Social Security or a Social Security scheme, or even all those national insurance schemes in our sub-region. Because I will tell you that in terms of their setup, their animating purpose, the categories of relief and benefits, all the regional schemes are kindred operations. They are more or less the same. But one can make suggestions to listening legislators. That could be made to Social Security going into the future. However, I wish only to recommend consideration of a few legislative changes which I think will be useful in Anguilla's context. And so I offer what follows. It must at all times be remembered that people pay into the fund. Some people pay into the fund their whole lives with the expectation that the basic income and pension and other benefits will be secured and assured to them when the time comes. Hence, I use a string of words that the fund must be prudentially managed. And the fund must not only be prudentially managed, but at arm's length from central government if those benefits are to be assured in the future. There's a need to re-examine some of the provisions. For instance, provisions in Section 17. Take, for example, the age at which contribution starts, and it's very unique in Anguilla's context. I suppose historical factors would have conditioned that kind of provision. The uniqueness is this, that contribution starts at age 15. Surely consideration must be given to increase this 15 to 18 in order to conform with international conventions and norms against child labor. The benefits provided under Part 3 of the Act, for instance, consistent with what I suggested earlier, should be expanded to align with certain modern realities. I did indicate that there was governmental intervention in collaboration with the board to provide unemployment benefit. But perhaps some consideration must be given now, and the time might be right for it to be considered as a fixed category of benefit, subject to certain conditions naturally. Fixed category of unemployment benefits moving forward. It is worth considering, and this tonight, and I'm sure after you will tell me, is controversial, because it is. And it's controversial in other territories and countries too. But perhaps some consideration may be given, and the time may also be right to consider health insurance benefit as part of the categories of relief in the fund. And if not part of the categories of relief in the fund, as a benefit perhaps administered by the social security system as well. I know that the Honorable Premier and Minister of Finance has this health insurance initiative under active consideration. And I know too that many other neighboring OECS countries and states are considering this with a very fair measure of seriousness. It is under consideration in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in Grenada. I know of it being under consideration also in St. Lucia. How precisely this component is to be funded is an evolving discussion, which naturally must be had with the public and key stakeholders. It may mean, of course, that the private sector, as I know the Premier has mentioned, it may mean that the private sector will have to participate in this reform initiative, perhaps with a public option for minimum coverage by the state. But from all that we have seen in recent experience in this pandemic, we need to start thinking in that direction. I am told too that sometime in 2014, a pilot program resembling much of what I have just suggested was tested here. And it was funded by the 3% Community Development Fund monies. So this initiative is not as novel as it may sound. The important thing is that we must move from considering it to planning it, from planning it to experimenting with it, from experimenting with it to fine-tuning it, from fine-tuning it to applying it. Naturally, with such a program, and I know that would be a ready concern, if not a ready objection. Naturally, with such a program, it will get rather expensive to roll out, simply because costs continue to rise. But whatever the modality, it can hardly be disputed that we must consider these reform options. We must address basic health care as one of the objectives of Social Security. I wish to suggest also that we re-examine the necessity and utility of investment vehicles utilized by such social security schemes, and even here in Anguilla. And if I offend anyone, I hope I am forgiven, and that my thoughts, ideas, and opinions are taken in the spirit in which they are intended. For instance, I consider that the necessity and utility of such investment vehicles, such as investment companies set up as a subsidiary of national insurance schemes and social security schemes, must be closely examined. Remember, social security has to be sustainable. It is a trust because it is the people's money. If the scheme, whether by itself or through its incorporated subsidiaries or vehicles, is engaged in things such as paying for feasibility studies for government projects, purchasing land to secure government transactions, it would place the fund in jeopardy of losing its ability to be sustainable. But most of all, it will not be serving its purpose by doing those things. I would recommend, therefore, that the legislators consider this aspect crucially. There should also be less ministerial intervention in investment and finance-related decisions of such schemes. For the reasons I've already articulated consistently. It's a trust, the people's money. The fund is a prudential fund and must be allowed to operate free of such non-trust related decision making. Political influences on decision making create a fertile source of bad investments and the improvident deployment of the people's money. Any meaningful reform in this regard must be in the direction of removing such political influences on matters of investment of fund monies and strengthening the experience and professional capacities of the trust decision makers, the trustees. Accordingly, there needs to be reform in the accountability and deployment of fund resources and investments. Historical experience has shown that when these matters are not carefully and closely dealt with, less than acceptable investment decision-making will rule the day. Fund monies would be at risk of imprudent investment, which fail to spread foreseeable risks to the people's money, resulting in colossal losses of fund resources, the people's trust money, or even the vanquishing or dissipation of the fund, either in whole or in part. So I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, that there are many, many more reforms that can be made. Many of those reforms, some of you have uppermost on your minds as well. But I wanted only to suggest a few for present purposes. I wish, before closing, to say that despite my relative youth, I believe, it is not my first rodeo, so to speak, in relation to experience with having to deal with the fallouts of the kinds of pitfalls I just mentioned, both as a lawyer and in a former life in active politics. Fortunate for Anguilla, the Social Security Board has managed not just to keep head above water, but to stand on a mountain. Consider yourselves mightily fortunate. And you must be commended for that as well, in my view. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have acquitted myself as a good apprentice, worthy of this assignment. And there is a Slovenian proverb that I am tickled to quote from, especially where I sense many, some, if not all, of my recommendations of reform either have not landed on fertile soil or have landed on very hot soil. But there is a Slovenian proverb which goes like this. It says, "Speak the truth, but leave immediately after." I doubt that I will have to make an immediate exit on this occasion, but permit me, therefore, in closing, to commend the Social Security Board on the strides they have made since inception. The institution of the Anguilla Social Security Board is sound, solid, and progressing. It has served Anguilla and its people in meeting its founding objectives over the years, and for this I salute you. I salute the Social Security Board. Now, is the time for a broader mandate, perhaps, a broader mandate to Social Security's mission. And I hope the legislators are listening. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for lending me your ears. And now I will offer mine. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you very much, Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Dwight Horsford. I see he's taken a right turn and not headed straight out there. And I don't see anybody trying anything. But thank you very much for that very thought-provoking lecture. And I'm sure that in the next few minutes, we have many questions that will be posed from you, the audience. So we look forward to your opportunity now to be part of this discussion this evening. With your permission, we will allow our speaker to sit and respond. Yes, so. Mr. Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Horsford. And before I make some comments, I would like to ask a question or two. Hopefully the audience will also ask questions. And then I would want to say a few things. But my question is based on the word that you used very early on. And you said, you used the word tensions. And in my recent academic life, that seems to be the word that comes out most often. Tensions between various alternatives, polarities. And how do we manage the polarities? And how do you manage the tension between the mandate, the original mandate, which was not Anguillian, not even Caribbean. It's the ILO, International Labour Office model of a social security system with certain minimum standards which are enshrined in that says that a social security system shall pay not less than this benefit and that benefit and so forth. And this, how do you manage the tension between having to carry out your existing mandate with the pressures which admittedly exist for responding to crises, shock events, such as Hurricane Irma, which we did, and now the global pandemic. And while I'm at it, let me just recognize the leadership in this of Grenada. I don't know what you had to do with it, but in 2004, after Hurricane Ivan, Grenada became the first system in this part of the world to introduce a temporary unemployment benefit after Hurricane Ivan, 2004. And we followed that in our Hurricane Irma response, which we have adapted more recently with the COVID-19 response. So how do you manage these tensions between doing what you were set up to do and evolving, as it were, to what is this new reality?
I can't promise you that I have all the answers or it would be the right answer. But certainly I think the point about it is adapting. And the tensions that I spoke of initially were those that emerged as societies evolve. Class tensions, social tensions. But the tensions that are emerging now, if you want to call them tensions, you may view them as tensions, but I would much rather prefer to refer to them as emergent realities which will condition your basic mandate. So for instance, using your example, the destruction and after effects of natural disasters and resulting economic loss and pressures on the community and on contributors and non-contributors alike created a social imperative which must be responded to by certain minimums. And so there was an intervention that there is Hurricane Irma relief, and you try to give people some measure of relief. In this context this year, the government intervened and tried to give some minimum assurance of support of $1,000 and so on. Although in the grand scheme of things, that minimum may not be adequate, and adequate in the context of meeting certain life fundamentals. But it was an intervention that had to be made because the recognition of the government was that here's a situation which emerged and it is requiring a response beyond the basic initial objectives of the social security.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horsford, and the Honorable Mr. Kenneth Hodge.
Thank you very
Minister.
much. My question is somewhat predicated on what the Director of Social Security would have said. One of the things that has emerged during this pandemic, when so many hundreds of workers were home, having to depend on that $1,000 from Social Security and later from government. The question is, don't we now have to think immediately of implementing some level of unemployment benefit? Because we are seeing the suffering of the people out there. And to me, this has to be an immediate imperative. I know the chairman alluded to it in her address, and I believe the premier as well when he would have spoken. And so I would like to suggest that this be one of the real underpinning factors of those reforms moving forward. I have a second question, but I will just leave that one for now.
So I think we're on the same planet with that as regard. But the thing is, the pandemic initially was purely and principally a public health crisis. But we have seen that the effect of its prolongation is massive or severe economic collapse. Virtually many territories and states, countries are struggling to survive. And the almost catch-22 decision is whether you seal borders and die slowly, or you open and fight. And that really is linked to an imperative, which I mentioned earlier. That is the primary obligation of the state. What is that? The welfare of the people. So that the pandemic presents an opportune time for us to examine these options and creatively fashion future benefits and models that are sustainable, but that not only sustainable in being able to pay them, but that they work in terms of the community relief. That is what, in my view, the prolonged pandemic has brought to the fore for us to consider.
I should just comment quickly that this was also the response now, or the talk now, if you wish, about a permanent unemployment benefit. It's the same talk that we had after we came home. The reality is that no social security system in the world can continue to pay benefits like this unless there's a revenue side to it. So we have to go beyond the fund and go to the legislation. As you say, even if you have to try it out and see if it doesn't work right and adapt it.
But there are key stakeholders. You have private sector interests that can be involved in fashioning some model.
Thank you very much. I now recognize our colleague, Professor Delroy Loudon.
Thank you for your presentation. I like the language you used. You said parsimonious and inadequate. Parsimonious and inadequate. And I agree with you. So my question to you, sir, is, should Social Security be means tested? In other words, Microsoft doesn't need, Bill Gates doesn't need to receive a Social Security check. The gentleman who, sir, or lady for that matter, who served in this honorable house for a number of distinguished years, should they receive Social Security? And if that is the case that they should, isn't the pool of funding available when we are at high moment of need diminished for those persons with whom we want to provide? In other words, how are we going to do? We have this unflinching task of expanding Social Security. Where is the fund going to come from to support this expansion we have? Equities and bond markets are not something we want to put Social Security money in. And we saw what happened in 2009, 10, and 11 when Wall Street collapsed, Salman Smith Barney, all the majors. So where are we going to put this money? We can't put it in the region because in the region, bond market and equity markets are not solidly developed in any particular case. So how then are we going to fund this great expansion which everyone wants?
A rather very interesting question and a legitimate one as well. I appreciate the question, and I can assure you, sir, I don't advocate for a great expansion. But let's look at it this way. There's always the human instinct to prefer to leave things as they are, because to go further would be difficult. But certainly, when conditions change on us, we must try to meet and cope with them. I see nothing wrong with trying to experiment with a sustainable way of providing some category or class of benefit that is an unemployment benefit. Whether it is by means of increased contribution or fund investment or special fund creation, I think the bottom line is that with the emerging phenomena and change conditions that we've had to deal with in recent times, and which are likely to revisit us again. Just like in meteorology, they tell you that climate change and these severe weather conditions are the new norm. And certainly the response to it is to prepare. And part of the preparation to these changed weather systems and their severity is to build stronger homes, is to build homes on higher ground, is to invest in certain equipment that would assist you to save lives. When we talk about the expansion of Social Security, do not fasten on the word expansion and the image that the word conjures in your mind of an elastication, even though in reality you're talking about going a little further than you are now. The point is that we have to respond to these changed realities. And to say that the money is not there is not enough. We must partner, we must come up with ideas. That is why we have think tanks in society. That is why we elect leadership. That is why we have people with special skills on investment committees and so on. Not to tell us the fund stops at the junction or our abilities stop at the junction. I hope I'm coming across.
There's one element which I'd like to draw your attention. We don't have to wait until the COVID virus. Non-communicable diseases in the region is already taking a major toll. and many other factors, addition to non-communicable diseases. It has a major effect on our population, the work life of many of our population, hypertension, diabetes, glaucoma, severely taking a toll on us already. So the net income those persons will be able to pay into the fund to increase the yield when their time comes, I'm afraid may not be there.
Thank you.
Fair point.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy Hodge.
I've been advocating for some time that although I believe in choice, people have a right to be able to choose between options. I think the Social Security is so fundamental that I cannot understand why we have gone into, why we still have split up what pension resources are available in Anguilla. We set up a pension fund. We've taken government employees out of certain categories of Social Security, things like that. And I have had an argument with Tim. I have said that you shouldn't, pension funds, if you wish to go out and buy a pension, by all means, and government should make it taxable. The focus should be on making Social Security such an ironclad pension that should be everybody's pension. If you want extra pension, you go out and buy a pension. But government should not make it easy for people to simply set up pension funds willy-nilly and have access to pension funds like that. Not that I wish to limit anyone's choice. I'm proposing to limit anyone's choice. But at the end of the day, if the Social Security cannot be guaranteed insofar as humanly possible to guarantee something, then we run the risk of affecting a large swath of the population, if not the entire population. And the protection of that could possibly be, as I said, make the Social Security the pension. You start to walk, even if it includes increasing the level of contribution, so that when you retire, you're not just getting necessarily a living something, but that is your pension. If you want an extra pension, you can buy it. I don't know, what do you think about it?
Thank you, Mr. Hodge.
Well, it was more of a statement than a question. But, ladies and gentlemen, imagine a world without Social Security. Would you want to live in it? That answers that.
Thank you. Honorable Premier.
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me.
Chief, yes.
Excellent presentation.
I tried.
But what caught my attention is you said the Social Security is a prudential fund. And you also mentioned something that would be then diametrically opposed to that, that there is a development or an investment aspect to it, which my concerns here would be, how can it, when your intention is to make it sustainable, on those two, in practicality, they work against each other?
Not really. Part of the obligations of trustees is to invest wisely. And investments help to sustain the fund. My particular concern is the deployment of fund monies in investments or classes of investments and the way decisions are made for such deployments. Now, because there's a very strong element, or should I say public element to these schemes, of necessity there must be some political relationship between the fund and people's representatives. My concern when I mentioned those things in that order was, and I was speaking from a place of experience elsewhere, is that since you wanted to be managed and operated as a trust, notwithstanding its very strong public element, you must at all times remember that it is the people's money. And in the way you handle people's money, its investment, its management, and its deployment, you must do so as if you were a private trustee. Now, it has been the experience in some territories and states where the law is set up in such a way that, yes, all these noble parts of the fund and how it should operate prudentially are there. But there is strong discretionary intervention of a political kind. And politicians are creatures of expediency. What is expedient? No. And Doc knows that it's not thrown at the Doc or anyone. I'm speaking in general terms in the context of our discussion here. And so when we talk about vision, that's why I mentioned the vision of its founding father. When you talk about the vision, your vision must be that not only this thing must be sustainable, but it must operate in such a way that its integrity is preserved at all times. People can believe in it. People can trust it, because remember, people pay into this thing with an expectation. Some people pay all their lives. And you don't want to have it managed in a way that people are paying for the benefits or even the pensions 3 and 4 times over by mismanagement. That was the context.
Thank you very much.
So, AG, my second question is, and you've alluded to it in your presentation this evening, how do we prevent the Social Security funds, which are the people's monies in trust for when they retire? How do you prevent governments from raiding the fund and using it as piggy banks for all kinds of other uses that were never intended by the Social Security scheme? Can that be done through legislation? How do you prevent, because the experience has been in the region that governments have raided the reserves of the Social Security funds. How do we prevent that from happening with our funds here in Angola?
The only way we can do so is by legislative intervention that removes the opportunity for this kind of discretionary involvement, and also by rigorously strengthening the regime for investment and responsibility on those who are given the charge as trustees. If the law, I believe that when the law places great responsibility on you, it must also place severe penalties on you. The greater the responsibility, the more severe the penalty. I think that's the way you get the best people. And the objective reality is that you could never remove political influences. And, you know, I'm not living in any utopia about that. Hence, I mention influences of a certain kind. Remove it from investment decisions, deployment decisions. Now, all statutes will provide for ministerial regulation on the administration of the act and that sort of thing. But the critical aspects of the law that minister to the fund's management, its prudential management, should have none or, if at all, very little political involvement in those decision-making.
Thank you very much. And we know that we have much more time to socialize after and continue with the discussion. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I didn't want to socialize. I just wanted to say that I listened to the addresses of both the minister and my chair here, Mrs. Brian Niles, both of whom spoke to this, and of course I listened to my own. All of which spoke to this modernization in our systems, spoke to this governance. In fact, I would just speak to the three that the chair spoke to: corporate governance, health insurance, and legislative reform. She spoke to those three. So you are, quite on point. And just for the purpose of the listeners, the Social Security Board has engaged a comprehensive revision of the Social Security legislation. Now, this is, as it were, pre-COVID, and COVID definitely is not a Hurricane Irma, because a Hurricane Irma came and it went, and its effects were fixed very quickly, very rapidly, and our tourism season started again. This COVID, who knows when it's going to end? Yesterday, I think, was we're not seeing it on CNN anymore because of the elections. But I heard today, they mentioned in passing, that yesterday the United States had the highest incidents in the world, daily incidents in the world, yesterday. And Europe is, and so forth. So who knows when this will end or how it will end? So there is a new reality, and there is a need certainly for the comprehensive, even more comprehensive now, revision. But yes, I want to, again, also commend you on what you were saying at this point in response to the minister's question. Well, how do you do this? I recall the director of Social Security she used the term national insurance, from St. Lucia, at a meeting of ministers and directors, when she said, in a Southern Caribbean country where I don't think she accepted anymore, this is not your private purse. Anybody who studied Social Security in the Caribbean has heard those words. This is not your private purse. And unfortunately or fortunately, the opposition used that on television for months afterwards to tell the government, this is not your private purse, that you could do what you want with the people's money. So you're absolutely on point. And hence, again, the need for that comprehensive revision of legislation that ensures, through legislation and perhaps through penalties, because while there is legislation and our thing that says, okay, this is your prudential responsibility, I really don't see any penalties in there for trustees who misuse their authority.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hodge. We take one last question from Mr. Proctor.
Not so much a question, but just a compliment. Give Jack his jacket. This gives no honor to him. I want to commend Mr. Horsford for his bluntness. Right? I thought it was very, well, I shouldn't expect anything less anyway. But it was right, it hit the point right where it needed to hit. Hopefully some soul searching for, not going to say the Social Security Board alone, but for all of us in Anguilla, because we own the fund. So it's definitely the questions that needed to be asked, the questions that have been asked. And I hope that we will give it the due consideration that it deserves.
Thank you very much. I had started to say that we will have opportunity to socialize, but also to continue the discussion after and when we move outside. And we want to thank our speaker for the very thought-provoking presentation, which obviously has stimulated much thought. And the good thing about having a presenter that's local and that can bluntly and deliberately and is well poised in his position to help activate change is that the discussions can continue at the right level here in Anguilla, because I don't think he's going anywhere. So Thank you very much again, Mr. Horsford, and thank you too for all the questions, and we hope that they can continue as well, because I'm sure that not just Mr. Horsford, but the Social Security Board and staff stand ready to receive feedback from the public in general, and I'm sure that those that are on social media or listening also have their comments and questions. I now call on Dr. Magdalene Lewis to make a presentation to our speaker, and so therefore I call you back, sir, to receive this.
Okay, good evening again. Thank you for that thought-provoking presentation, that lecture. It hit the nail right on the head, and there are a lot of things that the Social Security Board, we have a new board that has to consider, and I think you gave them a lot of food for thought and a lot of information that they can look at, consider, and try to put things in place. The board has performed over the years. However, there are things that has to be done, and we look forward to seeing progress for the sustainability of the fund.
And I wish you all the best.
And at this time, I present to you At this time, I present to you a piece of Anguilla's rock.
All right.
And, it's so heavy. So heavy that I come apart. That's the bottom of it. So it says, presented to Mr. Dwight Horsford, Honorable Attorney General of Anguilla, in appreciation of your outstanding delivery of the ASSB University of the West Indies Open Campus Social Security Week Distinguished Lecture. And it's on today, November the 5th, 2020 in Anguilla.
Thank you.
We thank you.
Let me show them.
Oh, okay. That's true.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's heavy into you.
The bottom is so we have to put it back in place.
Oh, I see. Okay, great.
You want to put it there?
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis, and it's good to see the Pelican Pride there. They are both distinguished graduates of the Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies here this evening. And now you own a piece of the rock. I now call on one of our UWI Stat ambassadors, student today, alumni tomorrow, and that's one of the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies ambassadors. She's our very own chair of the University of the West Indies Open Campus Anguilla Guild of Students, and she's none other than Miss Kimaloy Murphy, who will present the vote of thanks. Kim.
This has indeed been a wonderful evening with such a thought-provoking lecture. On behalf of the Anguilla Social Security Board and the University of the West Indies Open Campus Anguilla, I would like to express gratitude to the following for the part played in ensuring this evening's success. First, to the Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Dwight Horsford, for his sobering and insightful presentation. Thank you, sir, for reminding us of the innate purpose of social institutions such as the Social Security Board of Anguilla and the sustainable and transformative role they should play in national development. Dr. Phyllis Fleming Banks for so ably chairing the program, Pastor Perry Hughes for invoking God's presence on our behalf, Akira Rogers for the beautiful rendition of the national song, Director of the Social Security Board, Mr. Timothy Hodge, for his welcome remarks, Anika Webster Lake for introducing our distinguished speaker, and Dr. Magdalene Lewis for her presentation to our distinguished speaker. We also extend warm gratitude to the Honorable Speaker of the House of Assembly, Mrs. Barbara Webster Byrne, and her staff for allowing us the use of this honorable house. Titanium Sound and in Anguilla for providing sound and live streaming, Frangipani Catering Services, and the staff of the Anguilla Social Security Board and the UWI Open Campus. We are grateful for the media's presence, including Radio Anguilla, Creative Communication Network, the Anguilla newspaper, and the Daily Herald. A special thank you to Kenvis Gums, Rosanna Brown, Marva Simith, Paul Fleming, Dr. Maglan Lewis, and the chairperson and board members of the Anguilla Social Security Board. And to you, the audience, those who are here in person and those who joined us via some form of media, thank you for being a part of this event. God bless you all and continue to enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you very much, Kim. And now I take the pleasure to invite us to move outside and continue the discussion as well. And I would like to say thank you to our colleagues from the Anguilla Community College, our sister institution in particular, this evening who have joined us as well. So have a good evening and let the discussions continue. Cheer, you know you have a lot of work. Thank you all and good evening.